Cunning speech, perception, and deception. This will be a commentary, but there will be some scripture in it. These three, cunning speech, perception, and deception, are tools used maliciously by deceivers to dupe others into accepting change. Change they don't really want, and to cause division and confusion, so as to break down resistance to their agenda. Satan is, of course, the master deceiver, even called so in the Bible in various places. The technique is to label that which is wrong and self-serving as right, and to label that which is right as wrong, or to label anyone who stands up for right as misled, closed-minded, bigoted, or opinionated. In essence, to confuse the borders between right and wrong. To attempt to make one feel ignorant or out of step when they stand up for what they know to be the truth and right. To plant seeds of doubt with the intent to undermine what we know to be the truth and the reality. And if Satan practices this method, so too do those which Satan planted here through Cain, which have been working down through the ages to cause this confusion to come about. They use deceit, conspiracy, apathy, and the weakness of man's flesh against him, as they try to keep man in a stupor concerning the truth and concerning what life is and what life is about. If you consider how conspiracy works, you can see their method. Conspiracy is a word which means to conspire. Not only to conspire, but to do so in a hidden manner, so as not to be detected. And if you create so much conspiracy till everyone believes everything is a conspiracy, then you have a weapon you can use which makes everyone uncertain as to what the truth is and what is myth. In other words, they won't take a stand because they're unsure. No one wants to be wrong. And when they feel uncertain, you can break down the walls of truth. Because again, no one will take a stand. And this is where perception comes in. If you can change perceptions by making everyone believe that the majority share the same consensus, in other words, that their idea is the conventional wisdom simply by numbers, then you can effect great change, even revolutionary change. I have heard it said that a good salesman can sell sand to people who live in the middle of the desert. And this is a truth in a manner of speaking. All one has to do is be convincing, to look sincere. To do this, you have to make sure that those you are attempting to deceive are ill-informed, that they are unlearned, that they are unsuspecting. This will make them easy marks for your arrows of deception. Flattery, buttering up and complimenting your intended victims, albeit it will be meaningless to you, will lower their defenses and will open their minds to the seeds of deceit you wish to plant. Have you ever noticed that the more numbers there are, the more brazen people become? How does a group of people go from being a gathering to a mob? How does an assembly become a riot? Because somehow when people are surrounded by those of like mind, which they believe have the same intent, they're a lot more confident and even brave. Because they feel like they aren't alone. And they feel that no one can stop such a big movement. But no matter, the point is that if you have a powerful enough speaker or a powerful enough convincing sounding argument, you can change people's perceptions and minds. The power-hungry and corrupt do this all the time, because power is what they worship, and deception is how they get it. They can convince most anyone who is ignorant to reality of anything. They can convince you to pay for that which you don't want. They can take your rights away, and many times have your blessings for doing so, because you didn't understand. As long as they approach you with a grinning face saying, I am for you. I am here to help you. I'm going to do this for you, or I'm going to do that for you. I am your voice. Politicians practice this daily. They even convince you that you haven't done enough, that you should pay more taxes and have less rights so that everyone can be more equal. And sadly, large numbers of people succumb to their deception and vote them into office. And once they get power, they set up their network. They practice shady deals. They lift each other up. They put their kind into office, which is to say, godless, socialistic. They vote their kind into high positions like Supreme Court justices and so on. And they do this with help. You see, this whole progressive network owns all the information outlets, entertainment mediums like TV, television shows, the movies, the newspapers, the magazines. And most people are unaware and take whatever they dish out to them to be the overall consensus. Do you realize how it is that they have always taken the unsuspecting where they didn't want to go? Where they could not have foreseen that they were going? Do you think the people of Russia wanted to live under a dictatorship and communist rule with no religion and the state deciding what you would do with your life? Do you think that's what they bargained for whenever the movement started? Do you think the group that followed Jim Jones to Guyana and ended up killing themselves, many of them were killed by their fellow church members, had any inkling of what was coming or what was going to happen? Do you think that the Germans, before and during World War II, wanted to be under a dictatorship so that they would have no choice but to murder Jews or be killed themselves for not obeying? Now, many of them willingly obeyed because of racial hatred and such, but there were others who were swept along with the flood because they didn't see what was coming. And before any of these things went that far, listed above, any of these things got to that point, there was that first deception to bring them into the fold, to make them into willing participants. And that was brought about by convincing them through cunning speech and deception through perception, and making them feel that they were part of something, of large numbers, with one accord. In other words, giving them a family overall atmosphere. This opened their minds to the deception and closed their eyes to the truth and the reality. And by the time they did wake up, it was too late. All of the things mentioned above and all of the people were duped into their fate. They were taken where they would not have gone on their own. And it all began with a noble argument, a good cause, a humanitarian issue. When Hitler first came to power, I'm sure he didn't say, I'm going to destroy the Jews. No, he was for the working man, for the union. He was kissing babies and doing wonderful things, making a car that everyone could drive and making highways and fixing bridges and blah, blah, blah. It all began with evil being cloaked or disguised as good. And this is Satan's method of operation. Satan's own method. And the method of his offspring, the children of Cain. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should ask yourself why you don't, because it's written in the Bible. And true, you have to do some digging in the old languages sometime to see it. But Christ made it very plain. In the book of John, chapter 8, as well as other Gospels, Jesus told the scribes and Pharisees, who by the way were the offspring of Cain, that they were not of God, nor of Abraham. And we will go now to John chapter 8 and read a little bit of that, just to clarify this. So John chapter 8 and verse 38. And this will be Jesus Christ himself speaking. Verse 38 reads, I speak that which I have seen with my Father, and ye do that which you have seen with your father. Verse 39. Before we read verse 39, it should be realized here that Jesus is confronting the scribes and Pharisees who have been heckling him and looking for a way to trip him up so that they could kill him, which they eventually did achieve. Verse 39. They answered him and said unto him, Abraham is our father. Jesus say unto them, If you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. Verse 40. But now ye seek to kill me, a man that hath told you the truth, which I have heard from God. This did not Abraham. Verse 41. Ye do the deeds of your father. Then they said unto him, We be born not of fornication. We have one Father, even God. Verse 42. Jesus said unto them, If God were your Father, ye would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Verse 43. Why do ye not understand my speech? Even because ye cannot hear my word. Verse 44. Ye are of your father, the devil, and the lust of your father will ye do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. Verse 46. And because I tell you the truth, ye believe me not. Verse 46. Which of you convinces me of sin? And if I say the truth, why do ye not believe me? Verse 47. He that is of God heareth God. Ye therefore hear them not, because ye are not of God. Now for those who have not read the Bible, or should I say well enough to understand and do not know why those priests claimed to be Jews and were not the seed of Abraham and not of God, I have a study called Satan's Seed, Cain's Progeny, which goes into this in much greater detail. Jesus explained how Satan fathered them, and through Cain, they would bring poison instead of fruit. And he explained this in the parable of the tares and the wheat. However, I will give a short explanation. If you check the Hebrew of the Old Testament and the Greek of the New Testament, in which the Bible was originally written, you'll find that Satan is the father of Cain, and Cain was the first murderer who followed the pattern of his father. And Cain's children were set apart from the children of Adam and Eve through their son Seth. However, down through history, they meshed themselves into the tribes of Israel when they deceived Joshua, the son of Nun, who was the leader of Israel, who agreed not to kill them and let them into Israel to be servants. And so they dwelt with Israel, but by the time of the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, some 400 years before Christ, these children of Cain, the Kenites, the Rechabites, the Nethinim, had worked their way from being servants into the priesthood and were taking it over. And by the time Jesus did walk the earth, they had taken over the priesthood and were the church. And this is why they wouldn't accept Jesus and would not believe that he was the Messiah. And to this very day, their ignorance and blindness and their deception from then down through all the generations has caused many not to see the truth. Because just as then, even now they are powerful and cunning and know how to distort, mislead, and confuse. In the book of Revelation, they are called the synagogue of Satan, because through deception, they will bring about global government through cunning speech, through changes of perceptions, and through lies. Their agenda has always been the same: to dupe and to confuse God's children and to overturn and undermine God's order and authority. And today they still follow the same directive and agenda. And only those who are awake to who they are and know what they are up to, which are very few, can see. They still hold the power. They still manipulate the world and governments. They use their same tools: deception and wealth, money, commerce, to achieve power. Only now they have meshed themselves into politics and use the same cloak and disguise they have always used, which is to say, hiding themselves in what is seemingly good, what is seemingly noble, what is seemingly liberating. And those that are unlearned and unsuspecting do not know this. Specifically those who don't study their Father's Word. Do you want to know just how good they are at what they do? Well, then consider, in these troubled times with our deficit so high and it being so hard to earn a living, how easily a new tax is passed in America. Consider how money is wasted for the cause of socialism at taxpayers' expense, with no accountability for those who enact these things and policies. Consider how very few get upset when a right or a freedom is removed. In America, rights have been lost at an astounding pace by nothing more than the mark of a pen. Just consider how many times a socialistic policy got passed by being tacked onto a bill, cloaked, that was needed. Consider how many dirty little tricks they have pulled on America by adding something that they know that the vast majority of Americans are against and would never support onto a bill that was needed and should be passed. So that if that bill didn't pass because of what they snuck into it, then they can point the finger and say, we supported this much needed bill, but those hateful conservatives voted against it. This is what you call total dishonest manipulation and distortion. And those who do it are fully aware of what they are doing, and they know how deceitful it is. But again, they know that their agenda and their policy won't pass by popularity because no one wants it. So they pass it anyway through this cloaked means of tacking it onto another bill, because most people never read the entire bill anyway. And certainly the everyday American doesn't have time to screen every bill that goes through the House and Senate, which is why they rush them through many times or do them in the middle of the night. So we are being socialized without our knowledge. How many times have you asked, when did that bill take effect? When was that voted on? Just consider all the rights and freedoms we once had which are now gone, or should I say which have been removed from us. You can't even build onto your own house now without getting permission, without paying to do so. It's not bad enough that you have to pay to add on. Now you have to pay for a license or a permit. You can't even add an electrical outlet without having a contract or to pull a permit, which means getting permission and paying for it. You can't park your own car in your own yard without a tag. If you own a semi-truck, you can't even park it at your home. You can't even water your own yard in times of drought because you might be fined. They will say there isn't enough water to go around. Yet that doesn't stop them from issuing permit after permit for thousands of new houses and businesses to be built. Where will the water for these new businesses come from and new homes if there isn't enough to go around now? Well, you see, that doesn't matter because money is involved. Someone is getting paid to allow the new building. Someone is getting rich. Greed. You know, I constantly mention in my other commentaries and Bible studies what rights have been removed, like the right to pray in school or the right to teach the truth of what the Bible says concerning things like homosexuality. So we don't need to cover that again here. But who decides this? Who decides what we can and can't do? The government does. No matter on what level. Nation, state, city, and local. It's still decided for us. This is no longer a government by the people. It is a government by the elite, where revenue is God and where bureaucracy is commonplace, all with the intent of keeping you too busy to see what's going on. And I'll give you a example here of some of this government efficiency. The other day I saw two guys riding down the road on motorcycles. They were riding down the road about 80-100 miles an hour on their back wheels. In other words, they were wheeling their bikes, which means the back tire was on the ground and the front tire was in the air. And this put me in mind of what you have to go through now to get a motorcycle license. It used to be you could ride a motorcycle if you had a license. You didn't have to go through anything special. All you had to do was possess a license. But now you have to pay $120 for a class of motorcycle safety, then have a representative test you, and then pay for the license. Just so you can ride. Whereas you didn't have to used to do that. Well, some people will say, what's so bad about that? Well, it is another right removed, another freedom removed. And now you have to pay for a privilege that was once free. And you have to take hours out of your time to go through a course and then pay for a separate license where only you once had to have one. And some will say, well, doesn't that make you a safer motorcyclist though? Well, the two guys that I saw going down the road wheeling at 80 miles an hour no doubt went through this course and got these licenses, or else they wouldn't be riding motorcycles. Were they being safe? It all comes down to another way to take money and freedom from the working class, another way to generate revenue and to increase bureaucracy, and to take away freedoms that we once had. And you can also, if you're awake, see how they use events and circumstances to manipulate and move their agenda in. A nutcase wacko goes crazy and goes into a museum and kills several people with a gun. Now the media reports it over and over and over. Another infraction where somebody used a gun to kill somebody. Then someone comes up with the brainy idea to, hey, let's ignore the Second Amendment and take all Americans' guns away from them. Isn't that brilliant? Well, it hasn't happened yet, but it's in the works. Won't that solve the whole problem? Perhaps they haven't considered the Middle Ages when men only had knives and swords. Guess what? There were still murders. People still killed each other off in mass. Now, these who come up with these brilliant laws never stop to consider what God said to do with murderers, which is to say, put them to death publicly, so that other people will see this, see what the penalty is for murder, and then they won't do murder. But no, instead they stymie justice and use precept and their own interpretation of the law to do away with the death penalty, and label God's word concerning the matter of death penalty, what should be done with a murder, as barbaric. And so we now have a plague of murderers that grows every year. How blind can they be? What good will taking guns away do? None. But it's a feel-good policy with a deeper agenda behind it, which is to say, to de-arm Americans so that on some future day they can enforce a type of martial law and force the people to submit to their will. And this is exactly what Hitler did in Europe during the late 1930s. And this is feel-good policy, where they pat themselves on the back as though they have done something wonderful. Just like with this motorcycle license law. They pat themselves on the back and say, we have made the roads safer. But the roads are no safer for having to pay for an extra license and to go through a few hours of safety training. This is what is going on in the world today, and specifically in America. Feel-good politics. To say that you have made change, to say that you have made better policy, when in fact you have achieved nothing, but rather only have found a new way to screw the taxpayer and remove a freedom. This is what's behind this recently risen to power green movement, the global warming movement. They taxed already overburdened and overtaxed businesses under the bullcrap guise of protecting the environment. They tax emissions, they tax oil, they tax gas, they even tax cigarettes. They tax anything and everything they can for the sole purpose of putting Americans into bondage so that they can never get out of debt, so that they can never earn enough to get out of debt. Are we not slaves to the system? And most people are kept busy trying to make ends meet till they don't have time to sit around and consider why they work so hard and have so little. And it's all done under the guise of saving the environment or helping the less fortunate or taking care of needed things. When in fact Americans are being manipulated, and those manipulating them are exploiting the Americans' short memories and lack of attention to detail to what is actually going on, and covering their tracks very well. Of course, they have help. Again, no one reports them or blows the whistle on them, or very few do. And when they do, they're labeled as a right-wing extremist wacko. These things in the Bible are written of. False weights and balances. Our new president said that he is going to cut Medicare for the elderly. Mr. Obama says that the elderly have to realize that at their age there's going to be pain, and they're just going to have to learn to deal with it. What he actually means, if you translate his liberalese, is he's going to cut their ability to get their needed medications so he can hand out the money that they paid in to the sorriest, laziest, trashiest of society in free health care and Medicare. He'll hand it out to them hand over fist. He does this to pander to his voting base and to pander to what is perceived by most to be the poor and underprivileged, or the perceived minority. But actually it's nothing more than socialism, which the unlearned and ill-informed will buy as a convincing argument. Well, they're just helping out. They're just making programs for people who need them. But then again, it's always easy to convince people with gifts and freebies and all kinds of programs that will benefit them and take it away from people who've worked for it, and they will vote you into office. And the same thing with the justice system. Revolving door justice, interpretation of the law, letting criminals back out on the streets, not punishing them the way they should be punished. And then again, there's the money-making racket. The ACLU supporting every cause they can find to support that's anti-Christian or anti-godly, gays and lesbians or atheists wanting to sue America for one reason or another. And how many lawyers' commercials do you see on TV telling you that you have rights? You have the right to be compensated for someone else's negligence. Yeah, so long as that person that was negligent has a rich insurance company or has money themselves. But what if you are in an accident that was caused by let's say, a drunken illegal with no license and no money? Try getting one of these lawyers to take your case then. It's all about who has deep enough pockets for Mr. Lawyer to make easy money from. Why don't they just come out and say, you have the right to someone else's money? We will help you legally take that which is not yours and give it to you. Maybe we ought to run for president, or Congress, or the Senate. Now there's no such thing as an accident anymore. It's someone's fault. They maliciously perpetrated an accident against you. Now I realize that there are times when lawyers are needed, and when people are due to be compensated for their accidents because they can't pay their hospital bills or whatever, but we all know there are exceptions to every rule, and frivolous lawsuits have become a plague lately just because lawyers will take the cases, and because liberal judges will bend and listen to them. I'll give you an example, and this is firsthand. This is a true story. I have a friend who is 83 years old. and he is young for his years. He's still of strong mind and body. He mows his own yard. He works cooking charity dinners for the poor. And he's as sharp as a tack. He is a World War II vet who served in a big historical event in World War II. When he returned home from the war, he got a job working with one of the big three automakers at a car plant. And after a long career, he retired. He invested his money wisely and made himself a nice nest egg. When he retired, he moved to Florida, as many people do from up north. A couple of years ago, he was driving his SUV down the coast when he was stopped at a red light. And a 40-something-year-old man on a bicycle, who, by the way, was jobless, ran into his SUV with the bicycle while he was stopped at the stoplight. Now, the 40-year-old wasn't hurt beyond a few scratches, maybe a bruise or two, as many might suffer if they're in a bicycle accident. Yet, he called the police, and they charged my friend with the infraction for not yielding to the bicycle in a turn lane. It apparently doesn't matter that the bicyclist was not in the lane when the car entered it, and the car was stopped at the stoplight when the bicyclist ran into him. Apparently, the law is rigid. And apparently, it doesn't matter that the bicyclist was the one who wasn't paying attention and was at fault. As I said, the biker wasn't injured beyond a few scratches, a minor bruise or two. Yet this 40-something-year-old saw an opportunity and contacted a lawyer. And the next thing you know, my friend is being contacted by the lawyer and told to turn over all of his info on his worth, his bank accounts, his properties, and his holdings because he's being sued. The lawyer and the out-of-work beach bum bicyclist sued my friend for $110,000. Is this fair? Is this right? Is this not exactly what modern political correctness in this world is all about? Which is to say, taking from those who did have foresight and did earn it, who did work for it, and give it to those who haven't earned it, who won't work for it. What possible reason was there for this lawyer to sue my friend for $110,000 on behalf of this man who, through his own negligence, ran into the car and got a few scratches? I'll tell you what the reason was. Greed. And such is the way of the world today. When we allow things like this to happen and call it justice, but it's not justice by any stretch, then there will be no equality, no justice, and no fairness. I have heard of similar cases like this and read of them. There's a case before the courts right now where a drunken illegal ran into a family, and the cops came and a report was taken, and his blood alcohol level was well above the limit, and skid marks proved that he was the one at fault. Yet he turned around and sued the family, and according to his lawyer, he's the victim. No doubt this lawyer will manage to seat another misinformed OJ jury and win the case for this illegal by tugging on the heartstrings of the jury for an oppressed minority who came to this country and was troubled and had to drink and drive. And this is why there is no justice very much anymore. And why our rights and freedoms are being eroded by politically correct, self-serving people in power and in seats of authority. They set the policy. They decide what is right and wrong according to their own greed and their own agenda, their fleshly agenda. And let's talk about that for a moment. Let's talk about the double standard in this country for free speech. While we're talking about people in authority and everything being turned topsy-turvy. Recently I saw a column by Mr. Paul Krugman. Mr. Krugman is a staunch, hardline, left-wing progressive who writes for the New York Times. In this column, he compared the former President George Bush and our military to inhumane monsters against human rights. I find it ironic that Mr. Krugman can sit on his big behind, his overpaid behind, in a desk in an air-conditioned office at the New York Times and use propagandized labels to insult the president and our military, who some of them are in far-off lands giving their lives and shedding blood to uphold the freedoms of this nation, simply because he has a platform and a voice to spew out his closed-minded opinions. Yet his opinion and his voice is allowed and protected by those he is insulting. I am all for free speech, but there ought to be a decorum set. Mr. Krugman is likened to a modern-day Tokyo Rose who is doing everything in his power to undermine morale and to change the perceptions of the ill-informed who might read his column. He is allowed to abuse his platform and promote his particular brand of hate speech, while people like him also say that things in the Bible written from the mouth of God Almighty are labeled as hate speech. And simply because those words by God do not pander to perverseness. So people like Mr. Krugman and many others in the liberal media will call things hate speech which are not hate speech, because they love to use arguments like racism. They love to use the argument for diversity, but not real diversity. Their twisted view of diversity. Their politically correct view of diversity, I might add. In this society, there are laws against hate speech and derogatory labels and comments and terms. Yet here's Mr. Krugman using the politically correct attitudes of the modern day as a weapon against those who can't answer him back. Because, again, many of them are overseas fighting. They're not sitting in air-conditioned office. No, they're overseas protecting our nation. So we have a double standard here. One kind of hate speech is allowed, while the other kind is not. If you're a Christian or a conservative, you don't have the same rights as a liberal and a progressive anymore. And they think that's just fine and dandy and completely fair. You see, what Mr. Krugman wrote, as well as many others, is not just an opinion or a view. It is an agenda. It is not harmless words spoken by one person. It is a thing which is being written out all over the country like a parrot repeating what he has heard. It is a molder of perceptions, which to the dumbed down and uninformed populace is a type of indoctrination, because they don't know the truth. They're uninformed as to the reality. Apparently, in this case, the pen is mightier than the sword, because anyone reading such outright lies and closed-minded nonsense should have bombarded the New York Times with complaints and protests for them printing such ignorant hate speech. Yet that didn't happen, I'll wager. Maybe a few did. But this is what's going on in America. In America now, you can find support for anything. You can find a voice for anything. People will argue with you about anything. I used to use the analogy that if you said that killing babies was wrong, someone would argue with you. Well, lo and behold, was I naive? Because now they do argue with it for it. But you know, years ago, I was stunned when this organization called NAMBLA was formed, the North American Men and Boys Love Association. Imagine this. We have laws against pedophilia, but here is an organization which condones pedophilia and has a few thousand members in every state. Oh, they don't call it pedophilia. No. They don't want you to know what they're really about. And I knew this would happen one day, because years ago I said that if they allow gay marriage to be recognized or even to be considered for recognition, that it would set a precedent and open the door for other alternative lifestyles, such as pedophilia, to become another alternative lifestyle. And one day, probably bestiality. Imagine that, an organization that promotes sex with animals. And while some may think that is a little too far-fetched to ever happen, let us remember that not so long ago, the idea of being openly gay was a far-fetched idea. Yet now here it is. And not only is it here, it's in your face. It's parading down your streets. It's being taught in your schools to your children as common and normal. If you think God wasn't right on the money when he prophesied all of these things so many years ago, then you're either biblically illiterate or you just don't know and couldn't have anything proven to you. Because I know there's many people that say, oh, it's just a book of words written by men. Is this not the midday of the great falling away of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2? I would have said the dawning of the day, but we're well past the dawning of it. We have seen so many rights taken away. Yet they were taken slowly, and the loss was not noticed, or it was just seen as the natural course, and people quickly forget and lose their outrage. So, it becomes commonplace. It's just like the recent tea parties of tax day. What good have they done? I mean, it was good that everyone massed together and did them, but after everyone went home, what happened next? Did they act? Did they write their congressmen or senators? Did they call them or even email them? No. The majority sat back and said, someone else can do that. I showed up at the tea party and helped to show our numbers. Well, I'm sorry, but that just isn't enough, especially not with seeing how the left wing hangs together. In fact, our esteemed comrade, Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, within a few days of the National Tea Parties, said, these parties were not held by grassroots Americans. They were orchestrated by the rich in an attempt to dupe the country into thinking that America is mostly conservative and mostly still capitalist. Really? When did that change? I know they've been trying to socialize this country for years with a lot of success through their policies, but it hasn't become communist yet. When we of the United States have such a liar, such a distorter of the truth, such a blind person to the facts as the Speaker of the House, what does it say of us? What message does it send to the world? That we are a strong and righteous nation? Or that we are a nation of liars and panderers who allow people like her into power? America is sick, ladies and gentlemen. Not only her, but the world. And she badly needs the help of her people to act, to stand up, to be heard, and to be counted. If not, she will fall and will be a socialist nation, or should I say, a more socialist nation than we have already allowed ourselves to become, because we haven't paid attention, because we haven't taken account of what's going on, and because we have a short memory span. And because those who actually hold the strings to the nation, who control the real power through commerce, through money, through their vast wealth, who control the politicians and force these revolutionary changes upon us, use their cunning speech and lies and perceptions to change the perception from right to wrong, from fair to unfair, and sell it to those who don't see it, hook, line, and sinker. We're in this predicament. Do you know this comes right out of the pages of the Bible? Have you read with understanding that in the end times your leaders shall have the minds of children? That Satan shall come as the Antichrist, which is to say, in place of Christ? Most do not know this because they've never been taught. Instead of being taught the real Word of God, they have been taught traditions and urban myths in church. They've been taught we're going to rapture away, we're going to fly away. But that's not what Christ said was going to happen. Oh, it is too. I read that in the book. It says we're going to meet the Lord in the air and gather in the clouds. Yeah, you did read that. But probably what you didn't realize, as most don't, is that you are reading an English translation of what was actually written in Greek and Hebrew, which has gone through many different languages and many different hands to get to the English you now read. So most take it in an English-only understanding, which you can possibly do. But if you're going to do that, you have to read the whole book. You can't forget the rest of the Bible, which explains those verses and what they actually mean, and how Christ said he would return. Just as I alluded to before, Satan disguises his agenda in good. He cloaks it in what seems righteous. Humanitarian acts, nature-friendly acts, earth-friendly acts, as do his children. This is why it is written in the Old Testament and spoken by Christ that man lives not by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth from the mouth of God. Well, unless you read every word that proceeds from the mouth of God, then you will be doomed. You can't just go and sit in church for an hour sleepily and listen to some pastor spin off and pass off to you that what he's teaching you is the Word of God. If you have a gifted teacher, consider yourself lucky, but the majority do not. If you have not wondered why Jesus gives certain warnings in the Bible of how things will come to pass before his return and what to do when they occur, then you are ripe for the deception. Because so many believe just whatever they are spoon-fed in church. They never stop to think for themselves. They never stop to study for themselves. And this is why there are so many different stories and denominations and opinions, instead of the body of Christ, Christianity, being one, united as it should be. Now, I have various studies on these subjects. The Antichrist Identified, parts 1, 2, and 3. The Rapture and the Deception. The Four Hidden Dynasties, parts 1 and 2. And 3. New Babylon Rising, the One World Government. And I don't ask you to believe me, nor to take my word for it. Rather, I ask you to go and check these things out for yourself. Read the Bible. Obtain a Strong's Concordance so that you can break the English words written in the Bible back to their original languages that they were written in. So that you too can be sure of what Jesus said, of what God said, so that you won't be deceived. Again, these people who are trying to manipulate you are not going to be wearing big signs to let you know what they're up to. They're not going to admit what they're up to. They're not going to tell you, I'm trying to socialize your country and take away your God. They're not going to tell you that. They're going to say it's for a freedom cause. It's so that the church won't be endorsing a religion. Which that too is a misinterpretation, purposely misinterpreted, to mean something it doesn't actually mean. If you don't believe that, you need to read the other writings of the Founding Fathers, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and see what manner of men they were. How many times they invoked the name of God and thanked him for their blessings. Now, I know many politicians today, when a big tragedy will happen, will get out in front of the cameras and sing God Bless America and stuff like that. But then in the same token, they'll go and try to remove him every way they can. It is time for Americans to wake up and stand up and be counted. Jesus said, "He who is not with me is against me." Well, those who are fighting against religion, they call it religion, although their secular belief is also a religion. It's just not a religion with a deity, but still a religion, a creed, a set of rules to live by. Again, it's time to wake up. It is my hope for you that you will be able to see the truth, that you will study your Father's Word, and that you will make your voice heard before it is too late. And we are living in a Soviet nation, a socialist nation, a communist nation. This is one nation under God. And without God, we won't have the blessings. Thank you for listening to this commentary. This has been Just Thoughts.